Hello, everybody, and welcome to GoodTech. Haven't seen you guys in a long time. This is an ongoing discussion around technology and innovation. First, I hope everyone is well and safe wherever they are. I know that we're going through some very tough times at the moment. As a reminder, participation is encouraged. If you have any questions for me or today's guests during the show, you can dial the number on your screen right below me, and we'll do our best to get you in on the conversation. Today, we're going to talk about cybersecurity, but more specifically on the increased risk due to remote work and access to company resources. More and more companies are turning to a zero trust framework for security. What exactly is zero trust, and how can companies employ these methods quickly and easily? We're going to find out. Joining us are experts on the subject of cybersecurity and in helping companies to modernize, simplify, and vastly improve security. So the first guest today, please welcome the COO of PlanetOne, identifying and delivering cloud-based and connectivity solutions to small and mid-sized businesses and enterprises in the IT channel and telecom industry. Please welcome Chris Werpy.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks for the intro.
All right, nice to have you.
Absolutely.
And we have today also joining us, please welcome the CEO of TraitWare. TraitWare provides simple, secure enterprise-class login, combining native MFA and single sign-on. Please welcome Heath Spencer.
Hello, thanks for having me today. Glad to be here.
All right, so thanks both for joining us. I know things in your neck of the woods has also been quite, should I say, tough. So I'm glad you're safe and well and all of that. So let's jump right into cybersecurity. We know that risk has increased dramatically with the rise of remote work and access to company resources via the cloud and various devices outside of this so-called, what we used to call the corporate perimeter. In fact, we've seen a 300% increase in cyber attacks since 2018. Data breaches top the news, Twitter, Capital One, the list goes on. Heath, talk to us about why that is. Why aren't the old methods of security working?
So why the old methods of security aren't working, or where we are today, especially in the last 6 months, like since March, it got accelerated. Even prior to the current global pandemic and where we are with the being massively quickly forced to move to remote work because of that situation. Even prior to this, there was too many applications, services that needed to live outside of your corporate firewall. As you mentioned, we used to do this, the century-old build a castle with walls and then put a moat around it and then put maybe a fence outside the moat and all the different stages of layers of protection so that everything that was inside that perimeter had implicit trust. If you were inside the perimeter, you were trusted. And that doesn't work today because we are too mobile in today's world. And now with remote work, we have to be mobile. And so we can't reside inside of a perimeter, and we can no longer have implicit trust because we're no longer inside that perimeter, which is why we're leaning towards this zero trust framework evolving.
So Chris, let's, we talk a lot about zero trust, but, it doesn't sound like a very happy thing. I mean, aren't we supposed to be wanting to trust our employees and all of that? I mean, let's go dive deeper into zero trust. What is it exactly?
Yeah, and I do think that there's kind of an innate negative connotation to it. I was on a conversation last week with someone, and they were trying to get their head around what it meant and what it really was. And the comment made was, "Isn't it similar to what I teach my 4-year-old when they're dealing with strangers?" And I think that's a tough analogy, but it's kind of where you build from. And so as zero trust came out and the term became very popular, at least in our space with agents and bars, MSPs, and into the enterprise IT departments, it was trying to get an understanding of what that really meant and how that translated into designs, products, services. Because you can't just go buy a zero trust box and put it in your rack and suddenly your entire environment is now zero trust and everyone's happy. So when you think about it, it's been called a framework. It's been called pillars and fundamentals of a posture for security. It's been called building blocks of an architecture and connectivity. And I think the point you made earlier to expand upon it is, and what Heath said was, we had workers quickly go all over the world. This movement started even before then because we had applications moving all over the world. And so the old world that Heath was talking about was you had a corporate network environment, you had a data center or a couple data centers, all the apps resided there. Workers were in offices, you had a few remote that would run a VPN client, connect in, and you kind of had, just once you were behind that perimeter, you had full access to everything that was going on. So now we really permuted that complexity with the movement of apps, the birth of cloud, and everything being born in the cloud nowadays. And that's a very mature thing. That's not new. We all know that. And then you dropped a bucket of gas on that fire that was already burning with sending every worker in the world home in a very short amount of time. So what zero trust did was to have people take a step back and say, I don't care where the app is. I don't care where the user interface is. These workloads and these workflows are taking all kinds of different paths. Again, those permutations of how people connect and do their job. How do you create a framework where by its very nature and at its native layer, nothing is trusted regardless of where the user interface, and that workload are going to reside? So zero trust became that methodology. We've seen, if you Google zero trust, you're going to see a million companies that look different in what they do that all are saying they're a zero trust company. And I would say that everyone's part of a zero trust framework, right? It's the approach you take to doing that. And so when I started to look at this, I'm an engineer by trade, right? I used to design wide area networks, and they had this concept of redundancy. And if anyone's familiar with the highly technical OSI model, the first layer is the physical layer. I need to make sure that the two cables running into my office are different physically. So if one goes down, it doesn't impact the other one. So when I took a look at zero trust the first time, I said, okay, what are the building blocks and where do you start from? And so I reached out to Heath because one of the things that I was struggling with was, how do you build that true authentication layer at the very beginning of everything we do, that human interface that kicks off all of these connections and all the work we're doing? How do you start there? Because if you miss zero trust at the basic level, it's just like missing redundancy on a network design. You can have all the cool technology in the world, but if your two circuits are on the same fiber ring and someone cuts it, everything's down. And so what I was trying to reach out to was with Heath and really start this conversation between was around that fact, which is, how do we start at the human interface so that implicitly nothing is trusted, and start with how that operates and then build from there as we approach a zero trust framework. And the goal is to make sure that we can empower companies like TraitWare, companies like PlanetOne, can empower the distribution channel and empower the IT to understand how those piece parts fit and how you build that zero trust strategy over time.
Mm-hmm. So maybe, Keith, maybe we should, since we're on the subject of TraitWare, talk to me about TraitWare and how you fit into the equation.
Yeah, so TraitWare was created to solve for the inherent frustration that we all have, right? Like this understanding as the user, that we're over that, like the pain in the butt process, the password policy, and telling the world in the digital world who we are in every single different account that we have. And we looked at the landscape and said, there's modern technology out there that should allow us to improve this user experience and simplify that user experience while increasing the security. So as Chris just mentioned, We've strategically focused on where the human needs to interface with the machine. There, as Chris also mentioned, there's a lot of other companies out there and processes out there that are doing a really good job of creating zero trust between machine to machine connectivity. And we have a recent security vendor partnership with Citrix. And one of the reasons that started the conversation with Chris and PlanetOne is our partnership in that, and expanding what we can do for within the tech stack that they offer to their customers in that. And we've just done a really good job of that where the human needs to access the machine, and making it so that in a very simple way, we're authenticating who you say you are, providing security native in the solution. So multi-factor authentication is another hot topic today. Actually, just this last week, Microsoft released another article saying that, if MFA was in place in these scenarios, it would have prevented this breach. A big reason that MFA isn't in place in a lot of scenarios today is, one reason is creates so much friction and frustration for the user that then creates downtime and loss of productivity. So you have this balance between keeping an employee working and not locked out of a system and productive for the business side of it, right? Because the business side is always going to outweigh the security side. The convenience side is typically going to outweigh the security side. So how do you make the security work in a way that enhances the business's productivity? And so, that's one reason it's not there. Another reason it's not there is that service provider or that scenario hasn't taken the steps to use modern authentication standards to update to a simpler way to do it. They're relying on older technology, and they have this perception that it's too big a project to move to modern technology. And so, that's where TraitWare is trying to help them understand, whether you use TraitWare or not, you should be moving your solutions to a modern authentication standard like OpenID Connect or SAML, et cetera, to use those tools to enhance security and reduce friction for the user.
Right. And you mentioned, I'm going to back up a little bit because you mentioned Microsoft. Mm-hmm. And you guys have written an article. I love this title, Zero Trust MFA and Work from Mars. And you quote Ann Johnson, Corporate Vice President of Cybersecurity Solutions Group at Microsoft. What did she have to say about Zero Trust? Like, why are people talking about it? Either one of you, Chris, Heath, I know you wrote this article, so people want to hear. People want to read that.
Yeah, I'll go first, and then Chris can throw his thoughts in after. But basically, she did a great job. She mentions a few key elements in that. What rings true for me, again, there's Zero Trust is a framework, and there needs to be multiple pieces within it. Where, again, going back to where TraitWare sits, one of the things that she says is the first control that you need to put in place, again, Microsoft backing multi-factor authentication, she says that you need to deploy multi-factor authentication 100% of the time across 100% of your employees. Without putting things like authentication standards in place, that's going to become really difficult to do, or you're going to end up with scenarios where, like, we had a use case where we helped a software provider in the healthcare space who, because of regulation, had to use MFA everywhere because of regulatory requirements. In that scenario, some of their system admins literally had, more than 5 separate individual one-time passcode keys that generated a one-time passcode that was very long that they had to use in combination with a unique legacy login, so a separate username, separate password, and then a separate one-time passcode for each one of those environments. That goes back to that scenario where the opportunity for mistake or frustration by that user to enter the wrong password with the wrong, one-time passcode that's very long to do multi-factor authentication creates more opportunity for downtime or lockouts or password resets, et cetera. Again, going back to that business case. So as much as I agree with Ann's view of MFA needs to be deployed 100% of the time, it needs to be done in a way that the MFA is native to the solution and not a bolt-on or extra step for the user. And so that's, that's the one piece of the framework where we feel strongly about. And I'll let Chris speak to the other aspects of it and maybe the more the machine-to-machine side.
Yeah, and I think the specific use case that Heath just gave is indicative of the broader perception as it relates to IT security today. If I showed up, I've got a slide I use sometimes, and it shows all the different components and technologies that make up corporate IT security. And all of the different buckets and all the vendors within them, by the time you get done with that slide, it absolutely looks like an eye chart. And so the easy perception is point solutions, things that aren't native, don't have these kind of capabilities natively built in, can't integrate and use the power of the other solutions that you already have in place. You're absolutely right when you say that the perception can become, this is complex and hard to do. And so the approach then is different. It's understanding the building blocks. And as Heath said, these components need to be native within not only the design, but in the technologies that you're bringing in order for you to harness the power of the different types of security modules that need to go in there. I mean, in the old days, it was, I'm old enough as an engineer to remember the first time that a diagram showed up with the brick with the fire on it, right? And we were like, this is cool, man. We got security now. We got the firewall. Right, those diagrams look very different today, right? Of course, there's a brick with a flame on it, and that's cool, but there's a lot of other things in there that are now interacting. And so, as he said, if you try and just patchwork or put things in that's not native, the perception is very easy to get behind that. It just gets more and more complex as you try and build this stack with the point solutions. And so taking a step back and starting with the zero trust framework and understanding how those different technologies interact within the business, you've got to start with, I mean, even at the most basic level, where are my users and where are the resources they're trying to access? Because if you can't build the workflows and the workloads and understand that, you can keep throwing different point solutions in that don't have the native technology to support it. And you are going to increase that complexity over time. What we've seen with the shift to a zero trust framework is the ability to find products that are native in their approach, which is, again, going back to that implicit denial of anything. I don't trust a user or any connection, regardless of whether or not they're behind the flaming brick, right? And so as that defined perimeter, as Heath called it, the castle with the big moat around it, I mean, it's completely gone. The term now is software defined perimeter, because it is. There is no defined physical perimeter where I could draw a circle on a map and say everyone inside's good, everyone outside's good. The old way of doing this, and I don't mean old way in a negative way. We got by and used VPNs very effectively for a lot of years. As cloud came to pass and as applications and SaaS providers and all this became real within the corporate environments, and we got to this ill-defined perimeter, the moat no longer works, you had to change your way of thinking. And so natively within the products and solutions that you're designing, are you taking that into account? I would say most people are, right? I think people understand that concept to that level. But how do you do it without making that complexity high? Well, you start at those building blocks. And so when you look at it, we've been using, what year did we introduce username and passwords, Heath? Probably in the 60s, right?
1961, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
1961, that username and password was created at MIT, and they had their first incident of credential misuse within 5 months at MIT, because you have to imagine MIT grad students are extremely bright. So one of them, figured out how to manipulate that gated access pretty quickly. So we've been trying to solve that since then.
And then as technology and the hackers got more tools over time,
right,
compromised credentials are at the heart and center of most of the breaches, security hacks, and problems that we see, right?
Yeah.
And so if you start by just those low-hanging fruit, like let's get away from that, that's what builds that framework up to SDP. And then again, going into what I was saying was, the VPN side was, we have someone at Starbucks or someone at home, they launch a VPN tunnel, they get to the flaming brick, and now they're inside the perimeter. So because we've got this encrypted tunnel to get them there, once they're there, they're good. And again, that methodology is all changed. Doesn't matter where you are. Every transmission, every session that a user creates needs to implicitly go through a trust mechanism in order to let that occur. And so that's where it's built from. That's where we talk about the native side of this. Do the technologies have a native approach to zero trust innately with what it is they're doing? Or are we completing that complexity where we add on over time? I love telling that stat about the username and password, because we look at it and say, yeah, it's what we do, right? Chris.Warpy at PlanetOne.net, and password is first name of older son, last name of, or wife's maiden name, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? I mean, they're just, we can make a lot of jokes about it, but there is still something there. And so as you start with that user interface and move up the stack, that's where zero trust has to build from.
Yes. So I'm we all have these challenges every day. I mean, we're all smart people, and the rest of the world, they don't know, what are the challenges in getting people to understand these methods are not that complex. They're not more expensive. They're not, what are more of those challenges, and how do you face those?
So I think what I'm hearing in that question is, why is it taking companies time to try to move towards a modern platform, et cetera? I think they've taken steps that direction. And I think that it wasn't really until recently that we really truly, I'd say in the last couple of years, that we really truly had technology that allowed a company like TraitWare to achieve what we've now achieved. So I think there's just an education process around some of it. And then if we look at the steps that companies have taken to evolve, Chris mentioned, the VPN. There's another way to also look at this, is that the single sign-on, right, really was a stepping stone to trying to reduce the VPN and single sign-on almost work in the same way, right? So they looked at it as a way of, if you enter this portal through this path, you're then trusted to these applications that have all been put inside of your portal. Whatever you're authorized to use at your work environment through single sign-on, you have implicit trust once you've gone through that gateway. So SSO was one way that they were trying to be empathetic to the user, of saying, we know you can't have 100 username and passwords, so you're going to have one, and then we're going to put the, maybe we put the 80 applications or services that you need behind this gateway, and 20% of those are maybe a different risk metric. So you're still going to need to have some username and password separate over here, and use a different VPN to get to those. But again, whether it's the VPN or SSO tool, it's implicitly trusting you once you get through that gateway, right? So if we thought about it in analog terms, you're using a username and password, hopefully some type of other factor. So if we thought about it in analog terms, the username and password field box is the front door lock of your home front door. And then the extra step is the deadbolt. So moving that into the digital world, right, where we need to log into something, your username and password field box is the door lock, your credentials are the key, and then hopefully you're using a deadbolt. We think and then behind the scenes, the level of an alarm system through threat detection and monitoring, and all of these things that you may have if it's a very high risk environment, right? How do you give the user one process of opening that door with a set of keys that are not trusted each time, but make that transparent to the user, right? So make it in a way that we're going to change your keys every time you use them to get in your home for you, the door lock, for the deadbolt, and we're going to keep the alarm on to make sure that it's you, all basically to make sure that you're safe, knowing that we're humans and we're going to mess it up at some point, right? And I did very good to not drop any expletives there, right? So we're going to screw it up at some point because we make mistakes. So being empathetic to that process, and especially when we layer on, we build this layer cake of security of a username, a password, a one-time passcode, my location, my IP address of my machine, all of these different things that can somehow at some point cause friction and lockout and downtime, how do we make it so that the technology is doing the not trusting part, because we want to inherently trust that the user is trying to do the best they can, and we need to make it safe for them as best we can. Nothing is bulletproof, but if this whole, I don't know, I heard a conversation the other day and I totally agree with it, that in cybersecurity, we're not really doing security. We're doing risk mitigation. We have to mitigate as much risk as possible where we can. And we can't, at TraitWare, we can't solve every problem, but if we can mitigate risk in a lot of the areas and address the largest threat vector, which is username and password, 80% of every data breach is some way tied to a username and password. So if we can start there for at least your most common access points, then we're mitigating risk as best we can at some low-hanging fruit areas. If we take, recently in the news, Twitter, right? It's, you can go read the reports for yourself, but most likely there was a third-party tool being used that employees got socially engineered for their credentials. Then the bad actor got into there, right? The cyber criminal, right? Got into there. And then from inside that tool was able to discover other credentials that then gave them access to internal tools, which then allowed them to run the account takeover for not only internal tools for Twitter, but of actual users, right? So then they were able to discover username and password for the users. And this is the other thing that I'm passionate about, is that at some point, service providers, yes, they need to secure their own internal staff, and that's a stepping stone. But at what point are they moving towards modern authentication technologies for their client base? And that's where it really needs to get. And Twitter just came out 10 days ago and said, okay, well, we're forcing especially politicians right now during this election season and everything else to use 2FA, and we're recommending it for everyone else. Okay, well, at what point do we have to take the stance and say it's no longer a recommendation? It's not an option. It is a must-have. And the reason they're not doing that is because they're concerned that the user will experience too much friction if they force that 2FA or MFA on them, when there's actually technology out there that could make it simpler for the user. I, for one, don't want to create an account ever again that I have to create a new username and password for, period, right? I'm forcing our company to only buy products that use modern authentication, because I don't want to have another username and password. I want to use modern technology. So companies need to start thinking about, at what point are you going to, either from an OEM side or allow a bring your own identity type of standard for the consumer client side, whether that's just a consumer product or even just an enterprise service, offering it to other, there's so many third-party tools for businesses. Those third-party tools need to be using authentication standards, period.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I would say that the analogy that Heath just used about the house. You asked earlier, how is this? Why does it seem to be complex, and why is the perception that zero trust is complex? So you start with the analogy that Heath used, which is every time you go to log to get into your house, you've got a different key. Okay, so the connotation immediately is, how hard is it to manage all of those? Well, if you expand zero trust just beyond the authentication layer, now what you're saying is, okay, now I've got through the multi-factor and I'm in the front door. Zero trust now says I need to authenticate every time I go into a different room. So again, the old world thinking was, I'm through the front door, I have full reign of the house. Now with zero trust, you're saying if I want to go into the kitchen or the master bedroom or the bathroom, that also requires that transmission, that workload, whatever that action is, to implicitly be denied and untrusted until such time as it is trusted. So the perception is, how many damn keys do I have to carry? And then what else do I have to do once I'm in there just to get to the stuff to do my day? And that's where the industry and that's where the technology has advanced to the point where you can do those things without increasing the complexity of how it is you're running. That's where the technology has gotten to. I think that's what he's talking about is it inherently is complex, but the level of investment in R&D within these companies to build a zero trust framework says, okay, now you're through the door and you want to get to the kitchen. Let's create a seamless way to authenticate that trust path so that they have access to the kitchen. Right. And so it can seem overwhelming, but the reality is what we're trying to do in this industry is help the IT security staffs accomplish that. Because what I'll tell you is they're very intelligent people and they understand the challenges of their business and they understand what it is they're trying to do. Where we help is helping them identify what are the vendors, the technologies, how these interact, what have we gone through in our design in our past with our experience to help implement these types of solutions in a way that creates a better user interface, creates a better customer experience and a user experience, which at the end of the day, that's what they want. They don't want people to call and complain about not having access to something. And so when the technology stack allows for single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, complete zero trust, security-defined perimeters, and you do that in a way that allows the user to have a great experience, but also increases the security posture within an IT organization, that's the goal. And that's where we've seen the industry pivot because those technologies are available now. Now it's help educating and getting them into the hands of the people who can consume them.
Now, talk to me a little bit more about PlanetOne and what are you seeing in the industry that, I mean, I know you're working with security and you have a lot of different products that you're consulting with people on. What else are you seeing in the security world that you're either, impressed with, or just talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing?
Yeah, and again, contextually, this year has created different challenges for any number of obvious reasons. And so what we saw this year was this pivot. Businesses had to keep the lights on quickly and IT had to respond quickly. And I think IT departments around the world did an unbelievable effort to have that done. And so the race wasn't let's make the strategic next step. It's let's make sure everyone has access. Let's make sure the business can keep running. Let's make sure people can do their jobs. And so I don't think anyone bypassed security. I think it was a race to get the business to continue to function and operate. And some businesses were innately set up for this. Some simply just needed to buy more capacity to handle the amount of remote connections. Some made investments. So number one, that's what we saw was the quick rush to keep the lights on. I've said over the years, one of my lines is slow is the new broken. And we saw that in spades this year because you couldn't be slow in March and April when employees were going home, right? The business needed to keep functioning and it needed to keep functioning at a high level. And so slow was not an option. And so as we take a look now where we are, it's time for us to continue that conversation and really close the feedback loop cycle. So what PlanetOne does is go back and say, what were the decisions that were made to keep business operating and keep people functioning in their roles on a day-to-day basis? Now let's go take a look at that. Did we learn stuff? We probably did. Were we doing all of the right things? Well, we were at the time because based on everything that was going on in the world, there was a very finite set of things that had to occur. And so now is a time that we have a ton of data. And so what PlanetOne is doing is going back into these enterprise customers, working with our agents, our VARs, and our MSPs to understand what decisions were made, what did that create, what have we learned, and how do we apply that going forward. And so within the cybersecurity space, just at a very baseline level, sending a whole bunch of people home to work from wherever the hell they are, that can create vulnerabilities within an IT environment, period. So we have to go address that. And so that's where I would see the security space right now. It was very, very tactical earlier this year. Now it's to the point where we have enough data and we've seen enough of the user experience. We've seen enough of the user performance, the adoption of new SaaS providers. All of that, those data points are very relevant and they're very useful right now. And so what I see the opportunity right now is using that data set that we saw, that we were forced to do very, very quickly, and now reassess. And I do think there's a lot of opportunity there. I do think the lessons learned were great. Again, I think the motivation this year was first, let's keep going. Now, how do we use what we learned as a strategic advantage within our own industry, within our own verticals, to shift from a tactical response to a very strategic plan going forward. And it's one of the things that came out of this year. I'm never going to say there's a silver lining to anything that happened this year, because I think people would punch me. But there is this wealth of information that was generated in a very short amount of time that gives us the ability to go back in and reassess the climates that people have. And going forward, I will never say new normal, because it's such an overused term and I'm not even sure what it means. But as we continue to evolve the workplace for end users over the next few years, there's a lot of opportunity there to enhance, augment, and continue to mature into a zero trust framework.
Mm. And we talked about, we touched on money. Let's not forget money. People are losing money. And I read this statistic blows me away, but that 60% of small to mid-sized firms that suffer a cyber attack will fail. That's a lot of failure. So I'm just wondering, from like both of you, how are we saving money? Let's make that more clear. How is having good technology like this going to save companies money, besides that they're not going to get a cyber attack? Keith, you talk about cost saving with TraitWare. So tell the audience how TraitWare can actually save you money.
Yeah, well, it's a big reason I'm excited about working with Chris at PlanetOne is they understand, as Chris just talked about, looking at, okay, what transpired, what can we improve on, looking at the data, doing it in a strategic fashion where PlanetOne's doing a great job of empowering decision makers to make good choices across the board, not only for security, for user experience, but also at the bottom line, right? Like every CFO out there in the last 6 months went around and pulled every single budget back and said, okay, we're reevaluating each one of these things. And you're really going to have to prove to me why we need to spend money here, or how can we save money in that process. One of the things that I think, Chris is excited about working with us and we're excited about working with them is that we can do that with bringing the right technology stack that natively works together, that isn't bolt-on pieces. So with TraitWare, we're bringing in a modern identity access management platform that is natively passwordless and MFA inherent. So, and has the ability to do single sign-on as you need it. So we're really bringing a lot of the stepping stones over the last decade all under one solution, bringing costs down for the solution. But the other side of it is we will, and we've got proof of this now, we will reduce service desk incidents for password resets, right? So depending on which industry you're in, you have to maintain some level of password policy. Now, NIST goes back and forth on, okay, well, we want you to change your password every 6 weeks. No, now we just want your password to be 15 plus characters long, but you can keep it for this duty cycle, right? So you're still managing those policies within the guidelines that either NIST or other organizations are putting out, that whatever framework you've chosen to follow. In doing that, and then layering on other types of multi-factor authentication, one-time passcode, et cetera, you're typically managing a set of credentials and then managing a tool that's doing the MFA, where if the MFA was inherent in the one solution, as well as eliminating the credentials, you're going to cut costs on that process. You're going to reduce friction for the admins on administering those, provisioning, deprovisioning, telling people, hey, yours just expired because it's been 90 days or 6 weeks or whatever your policy is, having to force them to change it. Well, you can't use that one because it's too close to the one you used last time. There is a tremendous amount of soft cost in that. Then there's hard cost tied to other ways that you do it. So TraitWare was built on something you carry already every day, your smartphone, right? It is a software-based perimeter MFA tool that leverages a device you're already carrying on it. Whether it's a corporate device or a personal device, you choose what you want to do there, your company policy. We've got answers for all of that, versus having to buy a separate hardware token, right? So there's either other USB-driven key generators, et cetera, for MFA, or one-time passcode generators, or there's other applications that are out there that are using phones that would cause cost as well. But what we've seen is, as I mentioned in the one use case earlier, the company that was using a one-time passcode generator tied to legacy credentials, we reduced their password reset cost by greater than 90%, specific to password reset cost. So the math is, in any given company, on any given month, anywhere from 20 to 50% of your staff is going to have a service desk incident. Then 20 to 50% of those service desk incidences are going to be directly related to a password reset. So we've got a tool on our website called a TCO calculator, total cost of ownership, that you can go in and punch in your number of employees and then not change anything else, but just the number of employees, and see those soft costs, hard costs. If you're using an external USB key or something else, you could add those numbers in there. Otherwise, just using the metrics, and this is from Forrester's research and Gartner's research and everything else, the average cost of that service desk call is $70 per call. So if you just looked at 30% of your employees having a service desk call, and then only 30% of those being specific to username and password reset, we will show you a greater than 60% savings after using our solution. So that's just one example. The reason we like working with PlanetOne is they're going to come in and show you that savings for us, as well as tying it to the other tools that they are recommending. And you're going to end up with a package that works cohesively together to reduce friction and cost across the board. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great conversation, right? Because the history of IT has been this race to making sure you're strategic and not a cost center, right? I mean, the TCO, the ROI, this discussion's been going on for a long time. And I've worked with some of the sharpest minds in the industry in CIO and CTO roles who really took that and ran with it, right? As how do we focus the resources we have on strategic items that drive the business, as opposed to the tactical stuff that he's talking about, which is resetting username and passwords. And that concept applies all the way up the stack, right? It starts with authentication. I need to reset someone's password. VPN, we have all of our people coming to one concentrator. The concentrator's down, or we're having problems there. That requires a ticket. We have performance degradation on one of our WAN links. Does it fail over? Do we need to open a ticket and reroute traffic somewhere else? All of these concepts grow over time. And what you've seen in this evolution is put the intelligence somewhere else. So when it comes to authentication with TraitWare, let them run the intelligence, right? That's what they are experts at. And then you go from VPN to SDP. We're not resetting ports, and we're not worried about concentrators. I have a software-defined perimeter where users are authenticating to the cloud, and there's any number of inherent resiliency built in there. So you reduce the number of times you're trying to reset a VPN session. And then you go to the connectivity, and we saw the move from private networking to SD-WAN to what they're now calling SASE, the Secure Access Service Edge, right? And you're taking that intelligence with technologies to reroute traffic and applications real time without user interface. And so the level of investment that's gone in to create this intelligence within the services and the vendors who are providing them is exactly what Heath is talking about, because every salesperson for the last 40 years has tried like crazy to go show someone, I know you have to spend this money, but here's your ROI, or here's your total cost of ownership, right? And it's not always the easiest argument to make. You have some CFOs who see sales in a spreadsheet, and this one's higher than this one, go with this one. Okay. I'm casting a wide net there, so I don't mean to, but there is a methodology to IT decision-making and buying and purchasing and approving for these projects over time that I think this ability to make those TCO and ROI arguments have become much easier, because you can actually see real time the difference and the impact on an IT organization trying to run a business, so they can focus on things. I used to work with a furniture manufacturer, and when he got there the first time, it was a very tactical IT shop. And his vision was, I want to have as many development resources as I can so I can close all of my warehouses. Because one of their business models was, you call up and you say, I want to see these different office cubicles and furniture built in these formats. And so the warehouse people would go build it, and they'd put it together, and you'd go down and physically see it. And his view was, I just need an 8x8 room with white walls. Someone can walk in, put on an Oculus Rift, they can drag and drop the furniture they want to see. They can bring in a picture of their office. And then in real time, they can use augmented or virtual reality to see the same thing. And so his view was, if we get away from resetting passwords and we get to a mode where we're developing products and really IT projects that drive the business and revenue, that's where the shift occurs within the business. And that's the one thing we've seen is the level of investment and the emerging vendors and technologies that are out there are absolutely allowing the organizations to do stuff like that and take the menial stuff off their plate.
You know, Heath and I were talking about this whole SSO tax, and I kind of want to touch on that because I think it's a pain point, and I think it needs to stop. That, you know, let's put a word out for these companies to let people use modern methods for security, right? I mean, what do you guys have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to my comment earlier that service providers, application developers, et cetera, are going to need to start really looking at the path of authentication standards that they want to go with. I guess a simple way to think about this, or explain it, is that again, going back to the username and password being created in the 60s, and then because really back then what they designed it for was not what we use it for today, right? The intended use was never meant to do what we're doing it for today in this type of gated access. And when we had the boom of technology, right? The first big push of e-commerce and the tech bubble in the late 90s, early 2000s, all of that, username and password just was used because it was simple. However, back then, everyone built everything custom because they wanted to have control of the way that they did it. And, they wanted to be the guy that had to fix it when it broke, because it was going to break. And they wanted to make sure they got the job recurring, right? Because we didn't have a subscription model business back then. We just had licensing and, okay, well, you're your license. Oh, but this is a work ticket order. You got to pay this much to get it done. So the common thread across all these access points is username and password, but the way that the username and password was used behind the front door was custom. Now we're seeing this move, and whether it's Microsoft, Google, Apple, you're seeing all of the bigs make this push. I mean, Apple 7 months ago now made this big push on the consumer side to say, look, we're going to put out these APIs that we're recommending you all do so the consumer can start bringing their own identity to this login port, right? So it's not just us, but the service providers need to start taking seriously which authentication standard they want to deploy. We think the future is OpenID Connect because it allows you to deliver a very secure identity payload, and then you can use it in different ways once it gets there. The more adopted technology right now is SAML 2.0. If configured well, it can be very secure, but it needs to be configured well. But just relying on a username and password and not looking at ways to move to a tokenized identity payload needs to happen. And you mentioned this SSO tax. So this is a pain point, and I understand that there is a cost of implementation to these service providers. However, there are some service providers out there that are forcing businesses, especially the small businesses that can't afford it, to use lesser login security authentication, irrespective of TraitWare, just any login authentication. They're forcing you to be on an expensive tier of their product to be able to use these authentication standards. Once the library is built into your tech stack, it should not cost you more to move to this. In fact, I would bet that you'd see a reduction in having to run password reset tools for your self-registration people if you move to an authentication standard across all platforms. There is a website called sso.tax that you can go and read all the ones. I'm not going to name shame anybody else, but you can go read it for yourself on these different applications or service providers. that are forcing this upgraded tier to be able to use modern authentication, some of which I don't understand. It should be available. Security should be available to everybody. Maybe not on your freemium version, but your entry level, next paid program, it should be available.
Yeah, so guys, I'm very sad to say we are running out of time, but Chris, any final thoughts on what to tell people when they're thinking about zero trust?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen the world change. Even within working with enterprise and vendors, the emergence of a DPA or a data protection agreement is now becoming a standard within any agreements between vendors, suppliers, and IT organizations. So as Heath's talking about, it's going to be required if it's not already within the vertical that you operate. So I would just tell you that it's not an option. It's part of the world we live in today. The second piece, just kind of to kind of bring it all home is, I made the analogies to building networks, unified communications, contact centers, whatever technology or solution we're talking about and looking at. If zero trust is going to be a part of that strategic framework moving forward, you have to start at the base layer, which is that human interface. You can spend a lot of money and you can spend a lot of time designing a zero trust framework that fails before it even gets off the launch pad, because at the very basic level of that human interface, you haven't addressed it with a native platform that allows you for multi-factor authentication and allows you to create a zero trust framework. So you can spend and build all the cool stuff you want in any solution up the stack. If you miss in step one, you're undermining the principles of what it is you're trying to do.
Well said. So guys, I want to thank both of you for today. Great conversation. I think we have room for more for another show. So you guys, I hope you'll come back and join us on GoodTech. So if anybody has any questions for these two, you can reach them. I'll let you guys say where you can be reached. I know you were www.planetone.net.
Correct.
And TraitWare.com.
Correct.
But is there any other like Twitter handle or something that jumps to mind that you want to give people?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Werpytown, WERPYTOWNE. And again, I'll give it out. I don't mind. Email chris.werpy, WERPY at PlanetOne.net.
Awesome.
Yeah, you can find me at heath.spencer@traitware.com for email address, and just Heath Spencer on LinkedIn and Twitter at TraitWare, etc. And so yeah, we'd love to hear other questions or anything that you guys out there in the world have. And we're excited about our relationship with PlanetOne and Chris, and really helping people move to this framework and reducing friction for the users. So we're excited about the future.
Go passwordless.
Yes.
Yeah, go passwordless. Yay. As a reminder to our audience, this show is recorded and will be available on ubngo.com, and also on any podcast channel you choose. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay well and safe. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you on the next GoodTech.